So, the Five Nights at Freddy's Character Encyclopedia came out recently, and, well, it certainly exists, but unfortunately it's not the fountain of lore I know a lot of people were hoping for it to be. For what's supposedly an encyclopedia that claims everyone is here and laid out in awesome detail, it certainly does not do that, as shown by the glaring absence of several characters. And while some of the information does seem to be accurate, there are some inconsistencies in writing decisions that seem a bit strange, if not intentionally misleading or incorrect. So just what is this thing? Is it any good? And is it something you should try to use to understand the lore? Well, strap in, folks, and consider subscribing, because oh boy do I have thoughts about this thing. To start things off with the general contents of the encyclopedia, it's not the worst thing it could be. The little character bios are fun and can be rather amusing at times, and getting official art is cool, even if I'm personally not a fan of Henry's mullet. But even if I think the character bios can be neat, there are some decisions I wonder about, such as how 37 out of the 161 characters in the book are various reskins of other characters from the mobile game, but a whole list of characters that actually matter just aren't there. If you follow me on Twitter or watch my YouTube shorts, you've probably already heard me complain about the exclusion of Michael Afton and Phone Guy, but there are a whole bunch of other characters that are overlooked, such as most of the cast of the book series, FNAF 3's Phone Dude, the Night Guard's Jeremy Fitzgerald, and what are probably two of Michael's aliases, Fritz Smith and Mike Schmidt, the Missing Kids, Bread Bear. After all, who needs important characters like Cassidy, the vengeful spirit who is probably the reason William is still around in Security Breach, when you can have Twisted Chica, a character the book openly acknowledges doesn't even exist. I do understand the potential reasoning of not wanting to be too conclusive on the lore of the characters, but if they're going to have full pages for other lore-relevant characters, I don't see why they can't just be super vague or even lump them together like how the mediocre melodies have a page. Does it matter that much? Honestly, not really. However, I do have some concerns about the information that is included. FNAF books made in this informative style have a tendency to be unpolished, to say the least. If you Google Freddy Files errors, you can pretty easily find a list of various instances where the book contradicts itself, suggests things that were confirmed to not be the case, and other various errors, even in the updated version. The Ultimate Guide isn't much better, as Impulse Evan 37 demonstrates pretty well in his video pointing out its issues and errors, and unfortunately the Character Encyclopedia seems to be continuing this trend. Take Bonbon, for example, an animatronic that was introduced in Sister Location, the 5th game of the franchise. The encyclopedia says Bonbon is in FNAF 3, a game that came out before Bonbon even existed, and has FNAF 3 listed after Pizzeria Simulator, which doesn't match the usual chronological order they're listed in. None of the other Sister Location animatronics have this typo. Additionally, the entire entry refers to Bonbon as she, only to say on the very next page that Bonette is the first female Bonnie variant in the series, even though she appears only in Sister Location's Custom Night, well after we've already seen Bonbon. There are other errors as well, such as using a picture of Endo 02 on the pages about Endo 01, listing DD as being in both FNAF World and Ultimate Custom Night but not doing the same for Old Man Consequences, saying Helpy is in FNAF AR, and probably a whole bunch of things I just didn't even notice. The fact that there are errors in a book like this already brings scrutiny in and of itself, but there are also a lot of more lore-relevant entries that look to say one thing but could easily be misinterpreted or are only true under technicality. For example, the book says that Golden Freddy is in Sister Location. However, since none of the other FNAF 1 animatronics are listed as being in the game, and none of them physically appear, this could be a case of labeling rather than saying Golden Freddy is physically present, since the Custom Night game mode in Sister Location that includes all the animatronics is called Golden Freddy mode. There are other things that could also be technicalities like this, such as saying that the toy animatronics are in FNAF 4 and Security Breach despite the fact that, to my knowledge, they don't physically appear, which could just be referring to how there are toy versions of animatronics in those games. However, the pages that stand out the most to me are the pages about Charlie and the Crying Child. Charlie's page is weird. It talks almost exclusively about her from the games and lists her as human, but only uses images of her from the novels where she's actually a robot recreation of Charlie built by Henry to cope with his daughter's death, an event that the pages imply didn't happen in the books when they say that an alternate version of Charlie survived childhood in the novels. Technically, this could be referring to Robo Charlie when it says alternate version, but the book's alternate version of the human Charlie that's described throughout the rest of the pages did in fact die, and the way it's written would definitely come off as talking about human Charlie to someone who hadn't found out the plot twist of the novel trilogy. The only reasons I could see for this are either that whoever Scott got to write this didn't know that Robo Charlie was different than human Charlie, or they were just trying to avoid spoiling a book that's nearly 5 years old. And if they're trying to avoid spoiling that, what else do they say that's just intended to not spoil things? And this doesn't even fully address the Crying Child's page. That thing is just intentionally deceptive, if not outright saying things that are incorrect based on widespread assumptions. The book says that the Crying Child is the main character of FNAF 4 and that he's terrorized by the nightmare animatronics. If you don't define the main character in a video game as the character you play as, and assume that the following statement about him having the nightmares isn't also meant to say he's the one having the nightmares that we play in FNAF 4 based on the positioning and phrasing of the sentences, then sure, However, the nightmares we play in FNAF 4 aren't had by the crying child, but rather his older brother Michael sometime either during or after the events of FNAF 1. The animatronics' behaviors are a close match to how they are in FNAF 1, Phone Guy's first phone call from that game is a part of the ambiance, and Mike straight up draws Nightmare Fredbear in the survival logbook. Mike being a put-back-together crying child wouldn't make sense either. Not only does the book say that the crying child is only in FNAF 4, which wouldn't apply to Mike in the slightest, but the CCR in the encyclopedia shows him with brown eyes while Mike has blue. When playing FNAF 4, there's a chance for medical equipment and medication to appear next to the bed, something Cece wouldn't have been able to see thanks to his condition after the bite, and there are two spirits conversing in the survival logbook in addition to Michael, one of which is asked on a page featuring a Fredbear plush if someone still talks to them, which seems to be a callback to how the Fredbear plush talked to the crying child. Not to mention there's this poster that's part of a rare screen and pizzeria simulator that shows a man holding what seems to be a ventriloquist doll that looks like himself, a clown, and a bear. I find it very likely that this is meant to represent the Afton family, with the man being William and the clown representing Elizabeth. With how Michael is mistaken for being William by the sister location animatronics and shares a voice actor with his father, it makes sense that he would be the ventriloquist doll, so if Mike was the crying child, that would just leave a generic older brother who's only ever represented by Foxy to be the bear, rather than the kid who got bitten by Fredbear. Alternatively, if Mike was represented by the bear, it doesn't make much sense to me that Foxy Bro would be a ventriloquist dummy when his only major action we see is bullying his brother while wearing a Foxy mask. As such, the fact that the character encyclopedia makes it seem like Crying Child is the main character having the nightmares in FNAF 4 is a major flag to me for the lore help this book is going to be. Sure, you can technicality your way out of it by saying that the story we learn is his and that he may have at one point had similar nightmares that he then passed on to Michael, but that's not the way the book phrases it. If you go in as a casual fan, you'll probably think that we play as Cece in that game, which is just not true. If you have to technicality your way to the answer to that degree, you have to apply technicalities to everything the book says on the chance it's phrasing things in a misleading way. Just because Scott authorizes a book doesn't mean he's going to be sitting there meticulously crafting everything that the book says to have optimal lore accuracy, especially with the track record of the Freddy files and the Ultimate Guide. With how Scott has thus far been pretty hesitant to confirm things about the lore outside of more narratively driven projects that still tend to be ambiguous, I find it unlikely that this book would be intended to outright confirm things, especially since they went to Daco to ask for suggestions. I hold absolutely no ill will towards Daco, nor do I blame him for anything that the book does or does not say. However, I find it strange that they would go to a FNAF YouTuber for suggestions on what to include in this book if it was meant to be a stable source of lore carefully curated by Scott to help us solve the franchise. I'm not saying you can't appreciate the book or that any theories it might inspire are immediately invalid. My main concern is that people who haven't spent enough time studying this franchise might not realize that the book does have false or misleading information. This is especially a risk with the descriptions of characters from the new games that might be intentionally vague or misleading so as not to spoil the story. If you just want it to add to your book collection or read for fun, cool. But if you want to use it as evidence for a theory, I highly recommend only using it as backup evidence, and to just be aware that it does contain misleading and inaccurate information that people probably will point out. But hey, whether or not you agree, consider subscribing and sharing this video with a friend. I would really appreciate it. Don't die before you're dead, and I'll be seeing you in the next video.